Hi, I'm Barry, and I have the results from my latest social media poll where I was asking, what's the next video game adaptation you would like to see based on these options? And the options were Metroid, Half-Life, Horizon, or Galaga. I made these the options for all kinds of different reasons. I'm going to go through each of these and give you my thoughts. I'm going to tell you which one I actually voted for, and I'm going to talk about what video game adaptations would I choose if I could make a film adaptation from any game that I wanted. This might take a few videos to get through the whole thing, but we're going to do it. Let me say something here right off the bat. I do not believe that a video game can only be worthwhile if it can be adapted into something else like a film. I don't believe that. I think all kinds of work, all kinds of media, all kinds of art, all kinds of things can be great in their own right. Each form is going to be different. You'd probably agree with me. Reading a book and watching a film are two completely different experiences. It's just a big comparison between video games and film is that they both rely a decent amount on visuals, but there's all kinds of elements that make them separate experiences. I tried to talk about this before, and I think I mentioned this in an article where I was interviewed by Towson University magazine, where I talk about that something interesting about video games is that, unlike film, you as the player actually have a little bit of a say in the outcome. And I'm not just talking about a game like Heavy Rain, which is an awesome game, by the way. Even to a degree, something like Galaga, something like Pac-Man. You know, if you're Pac-Man and you lose, you lose. That was the journey of Pac-Man, at least in that instance of your gameplay, if you even want to think of it that way. So I think it's always going to be kind of a big challenge adapting a video game into a film. In another one of these videos, I might talk about what are some of my favorite ones. Nonetheless, I just thought this would be kind of a fun thing to talk about. So I'm going to start with those who answered Horizon. 17% of you said Horizon. Out of these four options, this is actually the video game I know the least amount about, but my friends did let me play that VR experience on the PS5 for the Horizon. I can't remember what the name of it is, but that Horizon VR game, that was something else. I feel like a lot of what you need to base a movie on is already kind of baked in to that game series, at least as I know it. It seems like there's a pretty strong narrative already. You have a pretty great sense of who the character is and the world. I feel like all the pieces you need to create something are pretty much already there. So out of these four options, that would be the one I'd say you already have a pretty good head start on the work ahead of you if you were going to adapt that into a film. The next one I want to talk about is Half-Life. Those of you who said Half-Life, first off, there was 33% of you said Half-Life. I appreciate you. I love the Half-Life games. I mean, I can tell you there is a lot there already to kind of create a film adaptation. What makes that one a little bit trickier than Horizon, I would say, is that the Half-Life games are, at least all the ones I've played, which I think is most of them, they're all first-person perspectives. I guess you would call them first-person shooters, although you like solve puzzles and do all kinds of other things from a first-person perspective. Whereas Horizon is other than the VR game I played, I know Horizon is a third-person perspective game. So the way that the camera works in the rest of the Horizon games is pretty traditional to how a film is composed anyway. I'm talking about, very, very generally speaking. Whereas for Half-Life, it being a first-person perspective, your director and your cinematographer now have to come up with all kinds of different things, unless you really lean into the whole first-person perspective, which, that could be interesting too. If you know the games, you know this next part is probably going to be the biggest hurdle to get over if you're really going to adapt this, which is the main character. The main character in Horizon is pretty established, I would say, at least to my understanding. Whereas in Half-Life, if you've never played the Half-Life games, I encourage you to stop this video now because I don't want to spoil anything for you. The main character, as we know him, is named Gordon Freeman. We don't know terribly too much about Gordon Freeman's backstory. We know, I think he went to MIT. We know he's a theoretical physicist. He doesn't say anything in any of the games. So he's kind of mysterious, and that has allowed the player to kind of, I don't know how else to put this, but kind of project, what they think of Gordon Freeman's personality. We as the player kind of fill in that gap ourselves. We kind of make that up ourselves. So the question of, if you're going to direct an adaptation of that is, what do you do with that? Do you do anything with that, or do you lean into the mystery? Somewhere I saw a comparison of the box art for Half-Life 2, looking at Gordon Freeman's eyes, and then looking at the G-Man's eyes and seeing kind of strange similarities. So you can look at that as one of two different ways. You can either see, the lack of, knowing a whole lot about Gordon Freeman's backstory, and certainly the fact that Gordon Freeman apparently doesn't say anything for whatever reason. You could see that as a really big challenge, or you could see it as kind of an awesome opportunity, however you want to lean into that. But outside of his character, there is so much, there's I would say, a pretty strong narrative, a pretty strong world too that's been built. Frankly, I think the premise is really kind of awesome. For what it's worth, it actually made me care a whole lot about physics and trying to understand the universe. What I also love about it, and I kind of like this kind of thing anyway, is I really love that it blends all kinds of different genres. I think we would all probably agree it's definitely a sci-fi, but there's definitely horror elements, I would say. I mean, in some instances in the Half-Life series, I'd say without a doubt there's horror elements. It's a pretty scary video game series, I'd say. And of course, there's drama. And I know for me personally, I like to think of at least every movie I make, I think of it as, especially if it's more of a serious movie, I think of it as like a drama first, and then I build on whatever the other genres are. I always like to try to focus on, not just story, but particularly character, which is one of the reasons why that one would be kind of challenging in whatever direction you want to take it in. I know for me, something that could be kind of interesting if you wanted to go in this direction is maybe make some kind of meta statement about how we don't really know a lot about the main character's backstory. And so maybe that's something to just kind of get kind of experimental with and make something really interesting, thinking really outside of the box. The next one I want to talk about is Metroid. This was the one I actually voted for. I'd say I know a little bit more about Metroid than I do Horizon, but not as much as say like Half-Life, at least on this list. But I've really thought a lot of the world of Metroid seems really, really interesting and kind of fun for a director to play around in. It's a sci-fi, which I think is really interesting. And you have a couple options with Samus as your main character. First off, I don't know if you know, I believe I'm correct about this. In the very first, the original Metroid game, I think we didn't know terribly too much about Samus. We didn't know, much about Samus's identity or gender or anything like that. And it was either at the end of that game, spoiler alert, or at the end of the second game. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's kind of interesting that you, at least in that first game or two, you go through the whole thing kind of, if you're thinking anything of that main character and who they are, you're kind of imprinting that upon them yourself. Nowadays it's 2024. We know a lot about Samus and her backstory, and you have a multitude of games to be drawing on as far as that goes. Some of the Metroid games are first-person shooters. Some are, the first couple are side-scrolling 2D platformers. So I think there's some cool opportunities if you want to make a Metroid adaptation. Okay, the last one I wanted to talk about is Galaga. I'm laughing. First off, those of you who voted for Galaga, good for you. Galaga, I love Galaga. I've been playing Galaga since I was 3 or 4, maybe even before then. In my hometown, there was a pizza place called Harry's. It was in Old Town Gaithersburg, and they had a Galaga machine set up, and I loved playing on it. It's one of my favorite games that I still play. I love Galaga. It's awesome. It's probably the hardest one on this list to adapt into a film. If you don't know Galaga, by the way, it's the one where you are like this spaceship, and you're kind of at the bottom of the screen and you're shooting as these, I guess, aliens or monsters. I'm not sure exactly what they are. These space things are coming down, and you have to blast them. There's not really a huge amount of narrative. You are a spaceship fighting off space monsters, and that's basically it. I would argue, this is an instance where it's okay that this doesn't lend itself, inherently to, super well to being adapted into a movie, because I'm sure it was never really meant for that kind of thing. And I think that's totally fine. Nonetheless, if you had to develop it into a movie, you have a lot of challenges. Number one, there's no real main character that's identified, but that's okay. I mean, you can make one up, or a series of them up. You'd have to use your imagination. What a wild idea. To come up with, who is the main character or characters, what are they doing there, what is their goal, that kind of thing. The antagonist, what's their goal and that kind of thing. It can be really fun to try to come up with something like that. I would be drawn to the idea for a bunch of reasons. I've already told you, my personal connection with it, but also, it's set in space, which I think is cool. It's obviously a sci-fi, which I think is cool. You would just have to do a lot of work to build everything up around it. I know for me, when I think of Galaga, I don't know about you, but when I think of that game, I think of not just that it's set in space, but I think of a lot of colors. I think of colors and darkness. And I say that because I think the aesthetic, one thing you could do is actually make it very colorful. I think you could lean into that aesthetic and make something really interesting. That's one option, at least. All right, that's it for now. I got more videos coming. Bye.